There are stories in sport that shine brighter than others. Stories where genius and tragedy intertwine so tightly that the name lives on far beyond the game itself. George Best is one such story. He was the first true rock star of football, a player whose genius with the ball brought joy to millions and whose life away from the field made him one of the most famous men in the world. He dazzled with his feet, but he also captivated with his smile, his style, and his effortless charisma. His rise was meteoric, his fall equally dramatic, and his legacy continues to haunt and inspire in equal measure. To speak of George Best is to speak not just of football, but of the human condition itself, of talent and temptation, of beauty and fragility, of how one man could embody both glory and heartbreak. George, born on 22nd May 1946 in Belfast, Northern Ireland, in the modest Cregagh estate. Please like, share, and comment on the video with your valuable feedback. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to get notified of new videos. From the beginning, George was obsessed with football. Life, and share, and comment on the family of favorite football player. From the beginning, George obsessed with football. He would run around with a ball for hours, often barefoot, playing against older boys who couldn't take the ball from him. His size was small, his frame fragile, yet with the ball, he was transformed. He had an instinctive balance, an ability to move his body in ways that made him untouchable. His classmates would talk about how George could dribble past a whole team on his own, how he seemed to see the game in slow motion while everyone else scrambled to keep up. Into Thalanced is impassive our George, he's activated with a favorite form. His ways amade his ravel and his wall with series in the cane. He would stand in my brace and seal and more. He had den for invently. He said he was dribble. The day he was led. He trust all the entires and peers. He was oned up the stash, a bit of a daydreamer, uninterested in academics. Teachers often wrote in their reports that he was bright but lacked focus. His mother once worried that George might struggle to make a life for himself because he was so small and shy. But George already knew what he wanted. Football was his escape, his language, and his future. His hero was Stanley Matthews, the English winger known for his dribbling wizardry. George would practice imitating him, running up and down the streets, pretending to be Matthews, gliding past defenders. His first organized football game was played with local boys' teams, and very quickly, word spread that there was a boy in Belfast unlike any other. He had this ability to beat players effortlessly. He played with a kind of joy that made people stop and watch. Scouts began to take notice, but many dismissed him because of his size. In that era, football was a man's game, full of tough tackles and physical battles, and George looked far too delicate. Bishop, a Manchester United scout in Belfast, in 1961, he saw George play and was immediately struck by what he witnessed. He later wrote a telegram to Matt Busby, United's legendary manager. "I think I've found you a genius." That word, genius, was not used lightly, and Busby trusted Bishop's judgment. George was invited to Manchester for a trial. When he first arrived at Old Trafford, George was just 15, nervous and overwhelmed by the big city. He only lasted 2 days before running back home to Belfast, homesick. It seemed his dream might slip away before it even began. But with persuasion from his family, George returned, and this time, he stayed. It was the most important decision of his life. His youth academy, his talent shone immediately. Coaches marveled at his dribbling, his close control, and his intelligence. He was not just skillful, he was clever, reading the game 2 steps ahead of everyone else. Within 2 years, he made his senior debut in September 1963, at just 17 years old, against West Bromwich Albion. The crowd saw immediately that there was something special about this boy. He was fearless, taking on experienced defenders without hesitation, playing with a freedom that made the game look like art. The 1960s were a time of revolution in Britain. Music, fashion, and youth culture were all changing. The Beatles were transforming music. London was becoming the center of style, and young people were claiming the spotlight. George Best emerged at exactly the right time. With his dark, mop-top hair, his cheeky smile, and his stylish clothes, he fit perfectly into the new world. Soon, the newspapers were calling him the fifth Beatle, and he became the face of a new kind of footballer, not just a sportsman, but a celebrity. On the field, he was mesmerizing. He had a way of dribbling that made defenders look clumsy, as though they were chasing shadows. His balance was extraordinary, his changes of direction lightning quick. He could glide past 3 or 4 players and then finish with either foot. Fans adored him. Old Trafford would erupt whenever he touched the ball, a ripple of excitement surging through the crowd. For many, just watching George Best was worth the price of admission. In 1966, George had his first saying against Benfica in Lisbon. United won 5-1, and George scored twice, tearing the Portuguese defense apart. The local press dubbed him El Beatle, and he became an international star overnight. He was just 20 years old. 2 years later came the pinnacle of his career. In 1968, Manchester United reached the European Cup final at Wembley, facing Benfica again. It was a hugely emotional moment for the club, just 10 years after the Munich air disaster had killed so many of United's young players. For Matt Busby, it was the culmination of a lifetime's work. United won 4-1, and George scored a brilliant goal, rounding the goalkeeper and calmly slotting the ball home. At 22, he was crowned the best player in Europe, winning the Ballon d'Or. He had the world at his feet. At that time, George Best was not just a footballer, he was a phenomenon. He opened his own fashion boutiques in Manchester, drove fast cars, and was constantly photographed with glamorous women. He was handsome, witty, and charismatic. He was football's first true superstar, living like a rock star. Young fans copied his hairstyle and his clothes, while older fans simply marveled at his genius on the pitch. But fame brought temptation. George began to drink more, spending long nights in bars and clubs. At first, it seemed harmless, part of the lifestyle, but gradually, it became a problem. His natural shyness and insecurity made him turn to alcohol for comfort, and soon it became a dependency. His training suffered, and so did his relationship with Manchester United. The early 1970s were difficult years. United was in decline, no longer the dominant force it had been. George grew frustrated, often missing training, disappearing for days, and clashing with the club's management. His talent never left him. He could still produce moments of brilliance that took the breath away, but consistency became harder. Fans began to worry. In 1974, at just 27, George Best left Manchester United. It felt like the end of an era, a tragic loss of what could have been. After United, George drifted. He played for the N27s was all cold after rolled of the clashing that was turned up to the space. Along fans often fans around a fans, but helps reveals he was end us. After United, George field Eve. As in without, George leaving George disports to a prize, latest fours both, and decided the single mater Beal told her and the link, as often belong work for George Best, and Mainsland being right. The diamond down to body had been revealed, a Dian listen Tortanix, leaving in George Best, are coveraging older or wellows, and Dian goes before caricide. If I found their work for this, they work something my calling and team is, or so inspired to win to the same, I went Beal and belong forth. George Best far that the difference of one amount and cuttered life, lost his occasion that he shilled a heart of the talk over the follows. In the 2020, the enter of 2070s, George Best also tragically seen for the points 26 cops of Best and leaves. George Best is blund. The details Mike mind as analogous by the same time that common collies and more both to even Ben. Across mass of George, a fails Beal disports, but difference that there would be capital, and just yest of the shope. After United, your George drifted. He played for a series of clubs, including Fulham, where his partnership with Rodney Marsh entertained fans, and Hibernian in Scotland. He also went to the United States, playing for teams like the Los Angeles Aztecs and the San Jose Earthquakes in the North American Soccer League. In America, he was a huge attraction, filling stadiums with fans eager to see the man they had heard so much about. On occasion, he still produced magic, scoring goals of breathtaking beauty. But the discipline was gone, and his career became a patchwork of appearances across the globe. Off the field, George's life was in chaos. He had relationships with numerous women, many of them models or actresses. His first marriage, to Angie MacDonald Janes in 1978, collapsed under the weight of his drinking and infidelity. He later married Alex Percy in 1995, but that too ended in separation. He had one son, Callum, who grew up largely in the shadow of his father's fame and struggles. As the years went on, George's drinking worsened. His health deteriorated. He was arrested several times for drunk driving and public disturbances. Friends tried to help, but George seemed trapped by his demons. In 2002, he underwent a liver transplant, a chance at a new life. For a time, he tried to stay sober, but soon he was drinking again. The press followed every detail, both pitying and condemning him. Embellish, yet despite everything, George remained beloved. Fans forgave him because George's legacy is complicated. On one hand, he is remembered as perhaps the most naturally gifted footballer Britain has ever produced. Pelé once called him the greatest, and even players like Johan Cruyff and Diego Maradona spoke of him with awe. On the other hand, his career was cut short, his potential never fully realized. He never played in a World Cup, never had the long, glittering career that his talent deserved. Instead, he became a cautionary tale, a symbol of how fame and excess can destroy even the brightest stars. But perhaps that is why George Best remains so fascinating. He was not perfect, not a polished hero, but a flawed human being. His genius on the pitch was undeniable, his battles off it painfully real. He lived fast, loved freely, and left the world too soon. Yet his name endures, his story retold again and again, a reminder of what football can be at its most beautiful and what life can be at its most fragile. For those who saw him play, the memories are unforgettable. The boyish grin, the mazy dribbles, the defenders left sprawling, the goals that seemed touched by magic. For those who came after, the grainy footage and the stories are enough to capture the imagination. George Best was not just a footballer. He was a cultural icon, a man who embodied both the promise and the peril of genius. His light burned out too soon, but while it lasted, it was dazzling.